Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're doing something a little different, really taking a close look at a single, very comprehensive source.
hmm
It's this detailed article exploring a pretty fascinating movement within Freemasonry, and we're going to focus particularly on one model they talk about, known as the European concept.
That's right. We're basically unpacking what observant Freemasonry is all about. It's this movement driven by a real desire, especially you see it in North America, to reconnect with what proponents see as the original deeper intentions of the craft.
Okay, so what's our mission here? What are we trying to get out of this?
Well, the goal is to sort of distill the core elements that define observant Freemasonry, and then really dig into the structural and cultural factors, the nuts and bolts and the whole feel of it, behind why lodges that adopt this European concept model seem to be working so well. They're reporting, effectiveness and even growth.
Which is interesting, especially when you hear about declines elsewhere.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Especially when the broader trend in some places is decline.
All right, let's unpack this then. What exactly is observant Freemasonry? What makes it distinct?
Okay, so think of it as a conscious movement, and it's pretty prominent in North America right now. It's really marked by a strong commitment to the traditional um, esoteric and philosophical sides of Freemasonry.
Okay.
Proponents see it as this deliberate shift back towards something maybe more disciplined, intellectually challenging, and ceremonially rich.
Contrasting with what exactly? What are they shifting away from?
Well, practices they might see as perhaps more casual, or maybe primarily focused on social stuff or external charity, rather than the internal work.
So it's not about creating a new type of masonry. It sounds more like it's about how you practice the existing craft.
Exactly. Yeah, this source really hammers this point home. The word observant isn't about some new ritual. It's about diligently observing and actively reactivating what they believe was the original intent of speculative masonry.
And that intent was?
To create this truly transformative environment, for an individual's moral, intellectual, and spiritual growth, using all the allegory and symbolism as the main tools.
Yeah.
Really is how that matters to them.
That makes a lot of sense. Fidelity to the spirit, not just the letter.
Yeah.
Where do these ideas come from? These roots of focusing on depth and rigor?
Well, the source traces it right back to the beginnings of modern speculative masonry. The first Grand Lodge in 1717, which was, very much a product of the Enlightenment, ideas of reason, self-improvement.
Right.
But there were earlier things, too. Thinkers like Ramsay in the 1730s talking about chivalric lineage, or the strict observance rite later on aiming for discipline, even if based on some myths. And even those historical clashes like the ancients versus moderns in the 18th century, they highlight this ongoing tension, this concern about ritual integrity versus maybe simplifying things too much.
So there's always been this undercurrent of valuing depth. But the modern movement, it seems like it's reacting to more recent issues.
Oh, absolutely. The source points to critiques going back, well, over a century now. Publications like The Builder magazine, way back in the early 1900s, were already sounding alarms
About what specifically?
about rapid growth leading to what they called a degree mill mentality. Rushing guys through degrees without real understanding, quantity over quality.
Degree mill. Yeah, that really paints a picture, doesn't it?
It does. And it wasn't just a one-off comment. The source highlights this really influential booklet from the 1960s by Dwight L. Smith, Whither Are We Traveling?
Okay.
And Smith was pretty blunt. He was lamenting what he saw as falling standards, membership being devalued by low fees and rushed degrees, kind of superficial fellowship, and a real lack of deep education and strong leadership.
Sounds like he saw a real identity crisis brewing.
You could definitely say that. Smith's call to try Freemasonry, like really try its core purpose and his focus on guarding the West Gate.
Meaning being more selective about who gets in.
Exactly. Being much more careful and selective. Those ideas are seen as direct precursors to the modern observant movement's core beliefs.
Okay, so all this historical critique and concern sort of paved the way for what started emerging, in the early 2000s?
Precisely. You had this perceived decline, you had falling membership numbers in Anglo-American Masonry, and people were contrasting that with reports of stability or even growth in parts of continental Europe and Latin America.
Ah, interesting comparison.
Yeah, and then you also had new academic research highlighting just how philosophically rich early Masonry actually was.
Ah.
All that came together. Masons started asking, why does my experience sometimes feel less than what I read about or hear about from other places?
Right.
That prompted this shift. And the term itself evolved from traditional observance more towards observant Freemasonry to emphasize the practice of observance rather than just one specific historical tradition.
So the core purpose is really clear then. It's meant to be much more than just a social club. It's about dignity, decorum, serious discussion, personal growth, restoring what they see as the real value.
That's the driving idea, yeah. Creating a truly meaningful space for personal transformation.
Okay, let's dive into these core tenets then. What are the shared principles you find across these observant lodges, even if they have slightly different styles?
Well, they all share this foundational philosophy, a really deep commitment to the historical and philosophical intentions of the founders, creating an environment where serious discussion can happen and this unwavering focus on self-betterment.
And the source breaks down some key principles, high standards in ritual and decorum. That seems huge, right?
Absolutely central.
Mhm.
It means striving for precision, perfect memorization in the ritual, cultivating a solemn atmosphere, often using things like specific music, maybe incense, controlled lighting,
Okay.
and includes a strict dress code, usually dark suits, ties, and mandatory white gloves. It all signifies respect, reverence for the work.
It sounds like every detail is considered to really elevate the experience. And this focus on form, it's tied to a deeper purpose.
Fundamentally, yes. It comes from, well, a dissatisfaction with maybe more superficial experiences and a shared search for something more profound intellectually, esoterically, morally within Masonry. The structure supports the search.
Education sounds like another massive pillar.
Oh, it's absolutely critical. Masonic education isn't just like an occasional lecture. It's continuous. It's central to the meetings. You'll find lectures, research presentations, papers, they often call them planches or pieces of architecture, linking back to the stonemason roots.
Right.
And they cover symbolism, history, philosophy, ethics. It's about actively bestowing light in a really tangible, intellectual way.
That sounds like a serious commitment from the members.
Right.
And does that commitment start before someone even joins with how they select people?
Yes, the unguarding the Westgate idea is non-negotiable. It involves highly selective membership, a really rigorous vetting process. Often takes a year, maybe more, of interaction and evaluation before a candidate even gets proposed for a ballot.
A year of vetting, wow. What does that process actually look like according to the source?
Well, the source mentions things they might ask for, like background checks, maybe a professional resume, a letter of intent explaining why they want to join, maybe other personal works. And a big part can be this traditional low door or blindfolded ceremony.
Tell me about that.
It's where the candidate, who's still considered a profane or non-Mason, is brought blindfolded into the actual lodge room to be questioned by the members right before they cast the final vote.
Wow, that definitely adds a layer of seriousness and, well, gravity to joining. What's the intended outcome of making it so rigorous?
The idea is that membership becomes something that's perceived as both hard to get and really valuable to keep. Because you've invested time and effort, and the expectations are clear from the start, it tends to lead to much higher retention rates and deeper engagement.
Makes sense. And once they're in?
New ASINs, sometimes called neophytes, get intensive one-on-one mentorship. Often there's a designated godfather figure to really guide them through understanding everything.
And the social side, the meals, they aren't just casual get-togethers either.
Not at all. The shared meal, the agape or festive board, it's integral, it's formalized, often quite ceremonial.
How so?
It's usually a structured dinner, maybe multiple courses with specific toasts, sometimes songs, and importantly, philosophical discussion built right into it. It's designed to reinforce the fellowship, but in a distinctly Masonic way. It's often called the second part of the meeting, and sometimes attendance is even required.
That really bridges the formal work in the lodge with the fellowship after. What about moving up? How do members advance into leadership roles?
Ideally, advancement to officer roles is merit-based. So based on skill, knowledge, commitment, actual merit, not just automatically moving up because it's your turn based on seniority. The goal is to have the most capable and dedicated people leading.
It really sounds like the whole journey, from the moment you inquire to potentially leading the lodge, is geared towards serious engagement and personal transformation.
That's the absolute core goal.
Yeah.
The entire experience is designed as this initiatic path focused on personal spiritual development, self-improvement, moral refinement, pursuing that Masonic light. And that includes a strong focus on intellectual engagement, active learning, critical discussion, research way beyond just memorizing lines.
And in this development, it takes time. It's deliberately not rushed.
Absolutely not. Observant lodges intentionally require longer periods between degrees. Could be a minimum of a year in some lodges, or it just happens naturally because of the amount of work required.
Like what kind of work?
Things like required reading, memorizing catechism, the ritual itself, understanding the symbolism on the tracing boards, those symbolic pictures.
Right, the visual aids.
Exactly. Maybe even artistically reproducing tracing boards
Yeah.
and writing multiple planches or pieces of architecture, basically papers showing they actually understand what they've learned. The source frames it as earning a wage increase in Masonic terms. You have to prove you've earned the right to advance.
Wage increase, I like that. Connects back to the old operative idea of proving your skill. What about the money side of things, the financial commitment?
Financial sustainability is seen as crucial. Many observant lodges have pretty substantial annual dues, sometimes talked about as being equivalent to a week's wage or more.
Why so high?
It's not meant just as a barrier. It reflects the seriousness of the commitment and, really importantly, it ensures the lodge can be financially self-sufficient without relying on public fundraising for its own operations. The principle is that a member needs to be able and ready to support their lodge.
So they can maintain quality.
Exactly. It lets them maintain high quality and ritual, put on elegant festive boards, fund strong educational programs, all without financial stress or needing to constantly ask the public for money.
That idea of self-sufficiency really makes sense for maintaining focus. And what about helping each other out? Mutual aid.
Paramount. Absolutely essential. Many lodges have a specific officer, almoner, eleemosynary, hospitaller, whose job it is to provide confidential support, financial or emotional, to members in need. And they actively reach out if someone's absent or seems to be struggling. They're seen as vital for holding the brotherhood together.
And they really prioritize digging into the symbolism.
Yes, definitely. There's this shared commitment to valuing the symbolic and esoteric depth, actively trying to understand the deeper layers of Masonic symbols and allegory, often connecting with esoteric traditions. Even in the minimalist style, the focus is intense contemplation of core symbols to unlock their power.
Even the room itself matters, the physical space.
It does. Some observant Masons prefer smaller lodge rooms. The thinking is that smaller rooms are easier to fill, which creates this powerful feeling of full presence, unity, warmth, better spiritual focus.
Right, rather than feeling lost in a huge empty hall.
Exactly. They feel it aligns more with how lodges used to meet historically in more intimate settings,
Yeah.
and just creates a better atmosphere than a big, sparsely attended room that can feel kind of cold or empty.
And all these principles working together, they're all aimed at creating what they see as an authentic Masonic experience.
Right. Seeking this kind of restored form of the craft, connected back to the founder's original intent or core principles. Now, while these basic ideas are shared, observant Freemasonry isn't monolithic. It shows up in slightly different styles.
Like what?
Well, the source mentions Anglo-esoteric observance might weave in things like Kabbalah or alchemy. There's continental philosophical observance, maybe leaning more into rational intellectual discussion. And then a minimalist style, which tries to strip things back to the absolute core symbols.
And today, we're really zeroing in on one specific model. The source highlights as being particularly effective, or at least proponents claim it is, the European concept.
Exactly. The European concept, or EC, is presented as probably the most common model. And it's heavily inspired by practices that are well established and, frankly, proven in continental European and Latin American lodges.
Oh, okay.
He got formalized for North America, notably by Kent Henderson. And its specific focus, it's not just about the nice atmosphere or the aesthetics. It's fundamentally about the structural design of the lodge, how they handle membership, and ensuring long-term sustainability.
Yeah.
Basically looking at how successful continental lodges actually work and adopting those structures.
Okay, let's really dive into the nuts and bolts here. What are the specific principles of these EC lodges? And according to the source's analysis, why do proponents think they work so well? Why do they contribute to this reported success?
Okay, a foundational piece, and proponents stress this is crucial because it builds incredible cohesion, making sure everyone really knows everyone, is the idea of numerous clauses.
Which means?
A membership cap. EC lodges typically limit their membership, usually somewhere between 35 and 50 members.
That feels really small compared to a lot of lodges you might encounter. Why is that cap considered so vital?
Well, the source points to a few strong reasons. One, it actually aligns with historical practice, when lodges often met in smaller private rooms. But maybe more importantly, it lines up with modern sociological research, like Dunbar's number.
Ah, the idea of a limit to meaningful social connections.
Exactly. Research suggests there's an optimal group size for maintaining real personal relationships, knowing everyone, and having strong group cohesion, and it falls right around that range. The impact of this cap is huge. It maintains intimacy. Every member feels known, feels connected.
And what's the practical result? How does that affect how the lodge runs day to day?
Significantly higher attendance rates. The source mentions that lodges using this model, especially in Europe and South America where it's common, often report attendance figures around 80% or even higher for their regular meetings.
80%? That's
Mm.
remarkable. Why such high attendance?
Because in a smaller, known group, every single member plays a vital, visible role. People notice when you're not there. You're missed. It creates this strong sense of mutual accountability and belonging.
Okay, that makes intuitive sense. A smaller, tighter group is naturally going to be more consistently involved. What about the leadership structure, the organization within the lodge?
EC lodges often have dedicated special officers and a really well-defined organization of workload. They go beyond just the standard warden roles overseeing degrees or the master running the meeting. They frequently use specific roles drawn from continental practice.
Okay, tell us about those roles. What do they do?
Well, there's typically an order, sometimes called the conscience of the lodge. This person is the expert on the lodge's rules, laws, traditions. They give thoughtful speeches at the end of meetings, tailored to the work done, and they can even guide or close discussion if it goes off track.
So like an intellectual guidepost for the lodge?
Exactly. It ensures intellectual rigor and keeps the focus on the lodge's purpose. It's like an internal quality control. Then there's the Master of Ceremonies. Their job is to maintain decorum, ensure ceremonies are done precisely, with dignity. They actually have the authority to guide members, even correct them if they're out of line during formal work.
So they actively police the atmosphere.
In a way, yes. They actively maintain that solemnity and decorum that's so central, rather than leaving it all on the master's shoulders. Another absolutely key role is the eleemosynary or hospitaller. This person is seen as the cement holding the lodge together.
How so?
Their specific duty is the well-being of the members, providing confidential support, financial or emotional, proactively contacting members who are absent, often managing a private fund just for members in need. This makes sure that mutual aid isn't just a nice idea, it's actively practiced. And some lodges also have a Master of Harmony to handle the music during ceremonies.
Wow, that's a very intentional, very specialized division of labor. It sounds like it supports every aspect of the lodge. How does that structure contribute to success?
By spreading out these critical tasks, upholding tradition, maintaining decorum, actively caring for members, it just leads to a smoother, more prosperous, better-run lodge. It frees up the standard officers to focus on ritual and governance, while these specialized roles reinforce the core culture and values.
Okay, so capped membership means intense cohesion, dedicated officers mean effective operation and care. What about getting into this carefully built environment? We touched on vetting, but how does EC specifically approach it?
It's defined by highly selective admission and truly rigorous vetting. Potential candidates go through this extended period of interaction and evaluation, often a year, sometimes even longer, before they're even formally proposed for membership.
A year or more, that's a huge commitment just to be considered. What does that evaluation period actually involve?
Well, the source mentions things like potentially requesting background checks, a professional resume, asking for a detailed letter of intent, explaining their motivations, why they want to join, what they understand Masonry to be, sometimes presenting research or other personal work. It's designed to really get to know the person.
And then there's that ceremony you mentioned.
Yes, and they often use that traditional low door or blindfolded ceremony we talked about earlier, bringing the profane in, blindfolded, to be questioned by the members right before the vote. It adds real weight to that final decision.
What's the tangible benefit proponents point to from this intense vetting?
The outcome is that membership feels both difficult to obtain and, because of that, highly valuable to keep. Candidates have invested a lot just to get to the ballot. They understand the high expectations, so they tend to be far more committed once they're members. It leads directly to better retention and deeper engagement.
Okay, so it's about ensuring genuine alignment and serious commitment, not just being exclusive for its own sake. And the financial piece. We mentioned substantial dues generally, but why is that principle so central and effective in the EC model specifically?
It's directly linked to substantial financial commitment for self-sufficiency. Those higher annual dues, again, maybe a week's wage or more, aren't just symbolic. They're fundamental to how the lodge operates.
And the operating principle is not relying on outside money.
Exactly. A core idea in many EC lodges is that Freemasonry should pay its own way. It shouldn't need public fundraisers to cover its internal costs. The due structure ensures they have the money needed to maintain incredibly high quality in ritual, in the festive boards, in education, in caring for members without diverting energy to bake sales or raffles. It reinforces that members must be genuinely able and ready to support the lodge.
It really frames the dues as an investment in the quality and integrity of the whole experience. And the fellowship, the festive board, is built right into this model, too.
Yes, it's formalized fellowship, not just grabbing a drink afterwards. It's a structured, often multi-course ceremonial dinner. Specific toasts, songs, planned opportunities for philosophical discussion. It's all designed to build strong bonds and reinforce fraternity in a meaningful, specifically Masonic context. And calling it the second part of the meeting really underscores its importance.
Shifting back to the individual's path is that deliberately slower advancement directly tied to the educational focus you mentioned.
Precisely. It's driven by a strong educational culture and deliberately slower advancement. The emphasis on continuous learning is unwavering. Candidates must study, they must reflect deeply, and they have to demonstrate genuine proficiency before they're allowed to move to the next degree.
And how do they typically demonstrate that proficiency in EC lodges? What does that look like?
Well, the source details requirements like potentially taking a year or even longer between degrees. And that pace isn't arbitrary, it's because of the work involved. Things like extensive required reading lists, thorough memorization, catechism, ritual, the symbolism on the tracing board.
Those complex symbolic pictures.
Exactly. Sometimes they even have to artistically reproduce those tracing boards. And crucially, writing multiple planches or pieces of architecture, essentially, well-researched essays or papers demonstrating their grasp of Masonic principles and symbolism. It's all about proving real comprehension, earning that wage increase in knowledge and commitment.
That's a serious amount of work. It ensures each step is truly earned, truly understood. What about the physical setting again? You mentioned smaller rooms being preferred.
Yes, EC lodges often favor smaller lodge rooms or temple spaces. The reasoning, the source says, is pretty straightforward. Smaller spaces are easier to fill with the number of members they typically have. This creates a powerful sense of full presence, of unity, of spiritual focus.
More intimate.
Exactly, more intimate, warmer. It feels more aligned with historical practices of meeting in private rooms or inns, and it fosters a better atmosphere than a huge echoing room with lots of empty chairs, which can feel cold or just off.
And the initiation itself, the experience of joining, is often enhanced with specific symbolic elements.
Yes, the use of the chamber of reflection is common, where local regulations permit it.
What's that?
It's often a small, dark room. Inside might be symbolic items, a skull, maybe an hourglass, reflective texts. It's designed for intense personal introspection before the initiation, thinking about mortality, the self, the journey they're about to start. Sometimes it's even preceded by symbolic acts, like visiting a cemetery. And they also use that low-door blindfold ceremony we discussed as that final, impactful vetting step before the vote. It all aims to deepen the personal impact of initiation and refine who gets selected.
Okay, so when you put all these pieces together, the membership cap, the specialized officers, the intense vetting, the substantial dues for self-sufficiency, the formalized fellowship, the deep educational focus, the slower advancement, the preference for smaller rooms, the enhanced initiatory elements, proponents argue, this creates a really coherent, powerful blueprint for lodges that are effective and sustainable.
Exactly. And the source points to empirical evidence proponents use to back this up, like the Grand Orient de France, cited as a large organization embodying many EC principles, reporting something like a 740% increase in membership since World War II.
Wow, 740%.
Yeah. And that's presented in sharp contrast to reported declines in places like the United Grand Lodge of England and large parts of American Freemasonry over similar periods. Proponents look at that stark difference and see it as compelling validation that the EC model works for attracting and keeping members today.
That is a truly striking statistic, a massive increase versus decline. It really highlights the claims about the EC model's effectiveness. So the CAM distinction of the European concept isn't just about, say, a certain aesthetic or vibe. It's about an entire structural and cultural framework that's intentionally designed for long-term health, for building a deeply engaged, tight-knit community and fostering genuine personal development.
Precisely. It's presented as this practical, adaptable blueprint, focused on cultivating serious, devoted Masons within an environment that's really optimized for growth, deep fraternity, and individual transformation.
And looking more broadly, how is this whole observant movement, including this EC model, actually impacting the wider craft? Is it making waves?
The source suggests its influence and visibility are definitely growing. It cites data from the Masonic Restoration Foundation. They track many of these lodges, showing that observant lodges on their lists have seen consistent membership growth. For instance, they reported an increase of over 8% between 2022 and 2025.
While the overall numbers were going down.
Right. During that same period, overall U.S. membership in mainstream jurisdictions continued its downward trend, declining by almost 11%.
So this specific approach is clearly bucking the general trend in a noticeable way.
It really suggests that for a segment of Masons looking for this kind of experience, these principles strongly resonate. And you're even seeing some institutional recognition now. The Grand Lodge of New York, for example, actually established an official Observant Masonry, or OM designation.
Really?
Yeah, with pretty rigorous criteria for lodges that fully embrace these principles. It gives them formal recognition and sort of holds them up as examples within the larger structure.
That's interesting. It signals maybe a growing acknowledgement, or at least curiosity from the mainstream about why these models seem to be working.
It certainly indicates that some major jurisdictions are starting to pay serious attention to the potential these practices might hold for, well, maybe revitalizing engagement and purpose within the craft more broadly.
This whole deep dive into observant Freemasonry, and especially focusing on this European concept model, has really shown a light on a very deliberate, very structured approach. It's centered on things like intentional community size, rigorous education and vetting, high standards for everything from ritual to behavior, dedicated leadership focusing on specific jobs, and expecting real commitment and self-improvement. And proponents make a pretty strong case that these elements are why it seems to be effective, sustainable, and even growing.
It really does present a powerful argument for prioritizing depth, structure, and intention when you're trying to build a meaningful community.
Yeah, it absolutely does. And it really makes you wonder, stepping back a bit, how many of those core principles highlighted in the European concept model, things like being really intentional about group size for cohesion, having serious vetting processes, creating dedicated roles so specific functions get handled properly, setting clear, high expectations for commitment, building in structured, continuous learning, how might those principles apply to making any kind of voluntary group or community more effective and sustainable? Any group that's aiming for real depth, shared purpose, and genuine engagement from its members, not just within Freemasonry, but anywhere.